Prince of Wales says the past year has been the hardest of his life. Speaking to the media in South Africa, he said he was proud of both of them for handling their diagnoses. Will Vernon has more.
Prince William just dropped a bombshell that no one saw coming. It turns out the royal family has been hiding a sister all along. If there's one thing the royals know how to do, it's locking secrets away behind palace walls. But this revelation sent shockwaves across the globe. A female family member, kept completely in the shadows, has finally been brought to light, and William's explanation is nothing like the scandal people imagined. So why was she hidden for so long? Stick around, because this is one royal twist you don't want to miss. Prince William's revelation about his sister. When it comes to the royal family, one thing is certain: you never really know what's lurking behind those palace walls. And lately, whispers have been swirling about a possible daughter fathered by King Charles, a child who was allegedly hidden from the public eye. Ever since the story broke, the world has been buzzing with questions. Who is this mysterious woman's mother? When exactly did Charles father a child outside his marriage? And most importantly, why has this all been buried for so long? Well, the speculations reached a boiling point when Prince William stepped in. Instead of letting the scandal spiral, he came out in defense of his father and addressed why his so-called sister was kept a secret for decades. His explanation wasn't what anyone expected. So what exactly did William reveal? Keep watching, because this story only gets stranger from here.
And amazingly, some of those very same trees still survive here today.
According to the rumor mill, King Charles III and the late Princess Diana supposedly had a secret daughter named Sarah, born in 1981, before William ever came into the picture. The theory, which gained traction back in 2015, claims that in December 1980, a then 19-year-old Diana was forced to undergo a fertility examination. This was allegedly on the orders of Queen Elizabeth II herself, to make sure the future princess could bear children for the monarchy. But here's where the story turns shocking. It's said that during this procedure, Diana's eggs and Charles's sperm were harvested without their consent. The doctor involved reportedly went a step further, using a surrogate to carry the embryo, and the result was a daughter, Sarah. The alleged secret princess, according to these claims, eventually uncovered the truth about her parentage years later. After Diana's death in 1997, Sarah supposedly stumbled across a personal diary that revealed everything. Fearing for her safety as she began digging deeper into her mysterious birth, she allegedly fled to the United States, taking on a new identity. It's a wild story, but here's the catch. Major outlets like the Daily Mail have debunked the claims, insisting there's no credible evidence that Sarah actually exists. What we do know for certain is this: Charles and Diana publicly welcomed William on June 21, 1982, followed by Harry in September 1984. Still, the rumors refuse to die, and maybe that's because Charles and Diana's marriage was already filled with cracks and secrets.
Honor and keep him in sickness and in health, and forsaking all other, keep thee only unto him.
By 1986, Charles had rekindled his relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles, while Diana sought comfort in her own affair with Captain James Hewitt. Later, Diana's romantic ties to Egyptian film producer Dodi Fayed made global headlines, tragically ending when both lost their lives in the 1997 Paris car crash. So, does Sarah really exist? Or is this just another royal myth that refuses to fade? One thing's for sure: when it comes to the British monarchy, truth and rumor often blur into one, and the world can't stop watching. And Sarah isn't the only name tied to rumors of royal blood. In fact, tales of illegitimate heirs and hidden children stretch back centuries. Which brings us to the bigger question: what about the other illegitimate children that King Charles is rumored to have fathered? Other illegitimate children that King Charles has allegedly fathered. Royals having secret or illegitimate children is such a popular trope in literature and media that it's almost cliché at this point. Think about King Arthur and his infamous love child, Sir Mordred. Or fast forward to Game of Thrones, where King Robert and Queen Cersei had nearly 24 illegitimate children floating around. These storylines didn't just appear out of thin air. They were inspired by centuries of British history, which is full of scandals and children born out of wedlock. One of the most notorious cases was King Charles II, who openly fathered at least 14 illegitimate children with various mistresses before his death in 1685. And now, more than 300 years later, history seems to be repeating itself. King Charles III has been dogged by similar allegations that he, too, may have children outside of his marriage. But unlike his predecessor, the current monarch has never once acknowledged these claims or even publicly addressed them. Still, the rumors keep swirling, and one of the strangest and most persistent centers around a man named Simon Dorante-Day. This bizarre story first made global headlines in 2016.
He's still going to have to answer it afterwards. I mean, him being king doesn't make me any less his son, does it?
No.
When Simon, an Australian man, gave an interview that stopped people in their tracks. He boldly claimed to be the secret son of King Charles and Queen Camilla, insisting that they had given him up for adoption decades ago. According to him, he was born in 1966, long before Charles married Diana, and put into the care of another family, while the young royals tried to keep the scandal hidden. At first, it sounded like one of those outrageous tabloid tales that would vanish after a week. But Simon wasn't going anywhere. He doubled down, and nearly a decade later, he's still pushing the claim. So who is Simon Dorante-Day, and why does he believe he's of royal blood? Simon lives in Australia now, but his story starts in England, where he says he was adopted at 8 months old before being moved overseas as a child. He insists that before leaving the UK, he remembers encounters with a wealthy couple, whom he believes were his real parents. Adding fuel to the fire, Simon claims his adoptive grandparents once worked for the royal family. In his eyes, that connection wasn't a coincidence. It was all part of a carefully orchestrated cover-up. Simon is convinced that Charles and Camilla are his biological parents, and that Camilla, just 18 at the time, had no choice but to give him up. Charles, he claims, would have been just 17. And, according to Simon, the royal family went to shocking lengths to conceal his identity. He believes his eyes were chemically altered from blue to brown, and even that his teeth were deliberately filed down to obscure any physical resemblance to his biological parents. For years, Simon has demanded a DNA test to settle the matter once and for all. He claims that every request has been rejected or ignored, fueling his suspicion that the palace has something to hide. He also says his grandmother, who allegedly worked for Queen Elizabeth II, confirmed the truth to him on her deathbed. According to Simon, her exact words were that he was Charles and Camilla's love child. These allegations created enough of a stir that the royal security detail reportedly kept tabs on him ahead of Charles and Camilla's 2024 tour of Australia and Samoa. There were even whispers that Simon had been placed on a watch list by protection experts after he publicly announced his plans to take the king and queen to court for a DNA test. In the end, nothing came of it, but the claims had already given Simon a global platform, and Simon wasn't done. To prove his case, he began posting photos online. In 2021, he uploaded a side-by-side comparison of himself and Prince William, insisting the resemblance was uncanny. He later posted pictures of his daughter, Marion, pointing to what he said were similarities with the royal family's looks. He shared details from his life as well, like how his adoptive mother once told him his eyes had been chemically changed from blue to brown when he was just 8 years old, leaving them red and swollen for months. For Simon, these weren't just strange childhood memories. They were evidence of a royal conspiracy. But he didn't stop at photographs. Simon insists he has research and documents that back up his claims. And he says he's been fighting legal battles in Australian courts for years, trying to find a resolution. His belief isn't just based on facial similarities. In his mind, there's a trail of evidence pointing to his royal lineage. And while most people dismiss him as just another conspiracy theorist, Simon has found surprising allies. When Prince Harry's relationship with the royal family soured and the infamous rift erupted, Simon publicly voiced his support for Harry. He claimed that he and the Duke of Sussex shared a bond as the black sheep of the monarchy. In a 2025 interview, Simon explained that he believed Harry would understand his plight, saying that Harry, too, had a bone to pick with Charles. He even offered advice to Harry on how to handle Meghan's critics, urging him to let Meghan speak her truth without fear of backlash. In Simon's eyes, their shared sense of isolation tied them together. But of course, every royal rumor has holes, and Simon's story is no exception. His timeline simply doesn't add up. He claims Charles and Camilla conceived him in 1966, when she was 18 and he was 17. But official records show Charles and Camilla didn't even meet until 1971. She was 23, he was 22, and that gap in years makes it virtually impossible for Simon's claims to be true. And yet, despite the gaping timeline problem, Simon refuses to back down. For him, the inconsistencies don't erase the evidence he says he has. He continues to share updates, post comparisons, and rally supporters online who believe his story, even without acknowledgement from Buckingham Palace or Clarence House, who have never once commented on his claims. Simon insists the truth will eventually come out. So, where is he now? Simon remains in Australia, still representing himself in legal battles in the Supreme Court of Queensland. While these cases aren't directly related to his demand for a DNA test, he says his fight is far from over. He maintains his belief that Charles and Camilla are his parents, and he isn't ready to let go of the story that's defined his entire adult life. At this point, Simon Dorante-Day has become almost a myth in his own right, a man whose claims straddle the line between obsession and conviction, between scandal and fantasy. Maybe he's convinced himself of something that isn't real, or maybe, just maybe, he knows something the rest of the world doesn't. Either way, his bizarre tale has kept royal watchers intrigued for nearly a decade, proving once again that when it comes to the British monarchy, the line between history and rumor is dangerously thin. But if you think Simon's claims sound wild, they are nothing in comparison to the love life of one of Charles III's ancestors. To truly understand how deep royal scandal can run, you have to go back centuries to King Charles II. A rundown of King Charles II's affairs. Charles II didn't earn the nickname the Merry Monarch just because he loved wine, music, and merrymaking. That title also came from his legendary womanizing. No British king in history had more mistresses than him, and while he was married to Catherine of Braganza, the shy queen turned a blind eye to his endless affairs. Their marriage never produced children, but Charles had at least 11 illegitimate offspring by 14 mistresses, plus countless brief encounters that only added to his reputation. One of the most prominent women in his early life was Lucy Walter, also known as Lucy Barlow. Lucy was one of Charles's first mistresses and the mother of his most famous illegitimate child, James Scott, who would later become the first Duke of Monmouth. His life ended brutally when, at just 36, he was executed for treason against his father's uncle, James II. Charles had first met Lucy in The Hague in 1648, where she had joined the exiled court while Charles was seeking refuge during the English Civil War. Both just 18 years old at the time, they quickly became lovers. Their romance lasted until 1650, though they crossed paths several times afterward, both in the Netherlands and later in France once Charles was restored to the throne. Lucy's beauty was well known. Painter Peter Lely captured her as a sensual figure, while diarist John Evelyn described her as a brown, beautiful, bold, but insipid creature. But their relationship was rocky, and after it ended, Lucy spiraled into scandal. She was rumored to have taken on countless lovers, accused of spying, and even thrown into the Tower of London in 1656, alongside her lover, Lord Thomas. After being released and deported back to the Dutch Republic, she found herself in desperate financial straits. At one point, she even tried blackmailing the king by threatening to release his private letters. Charles, more interested in his son than in rekindling things with Lucy, had young James Scott kidnapped and taken to Paris, Lucy eventually followed him to France, but she died in poverty in 1658, most likely from syphilis. By 1660, Charles was back in England, and it wasn't long before he set his sights on Barbara Palmer, later the Duchess of Cleveland. Barbara was fiery, ambitious, and drop-dead gorgeous, with thick hair, heavy-lidded eyes, and a voluptuous figure that captivated the king. Her influence over Charles was immense, so much so that she managed to secure seats on the Privy Council for her friends and family. But her extravagant tastes and volatile temper earned her enemies, particularly the Earl of Clarendon, Charles's chief advisor, who couldn't stand her. Queen Catherine despised her too, not just because Barbara flaunted her role as the king's mistress, but also because she gambled recklessly and seemed to revel in excess. Barbara became known as the uncrowned queen, and Charles showered her with wealth, granting her more than £45,000 a year. But even her grip on him eventually weakened. After years of indulgence, Charles tired of her drama and moved on to new conquests. Barbara, meanwhile, fell into infamy when she tore down the magnificent Nonsuch Palace, originally built by Henry VIII just to pay off her gambling debts. Charles had given her the palace as a gift, but its destruction cemented her reputation as one of the most wasteful royal mistresses in history. Next came Moll Davis, an actress whose relationship with Charles began in 1667. No one's entirely sure if they met at a coffee house or in the theater, but either way, she caught the king's eye. Moll came from humble beginnings. She herself was illegitimate and worked with the Duke's theater company. Though she was undeniably beautiful, Moll had a reputation for vulgarity. She flaunted the lavish gifts Charles gave her, and Samuel, Pepys's wife, famously called her the most impertinent slut. Like many of the king's mistresses, Moll bore him a child, a daughter named Mary, but her time with Charles was short-lived. One story even claims her rival, the actress Nell Gwynn, slipped a laxative into a cake Moll ate before seeing the king. Whatever the truth, Charles soon dismissed her. Still, she retired comfortably, with a generous pension and a fine home in St. James's Square. Then came Nell Gwynn, perhaps the most beloved of all Charles's mistresses. He first met her in 1668 at the Duke House Theatre, where Nell was performing. Unlike the haughty Barbara Palmer or the flashy Moll Davis, Nell was charming, witty, and refreshingly down-to-earth. Charles adored her, and their relationship endured far longer than most. She bore him 2 sons, Charles and James Beauclerk, and became a fixture in his life. Nell wasn't just a royal mistress, she used her influence to do good. She's credited with inspiring the creation of the Chelsea Pensioners in 1682, after she persuaded Charles to build a hospital for war veterans she had seen begging on the streets. The king rewarded her devotion with £8,000 in gifts and allowed her to buy the lease of her Pall Mall home outright. Nell Gwynn wasn't just a lover. She was a partner who earned a special place in Charles's heart. But perhaps the most scandalous of his affairs was with Hortense Mancini, Duchess de Mazarin. Born in Rome, Hortense was one of 5 sisters sent to Paris in hopes of marrying rich and powerful men. Charles had actually proposed to her back in 1659, but at the time he was an exiled prince with nothing to offer, and her powerful uncle, Cardinal Mazarin, turned him down. After Charles became king, the cardinal changed his mind and offered him a massive dowry. But by then, Hortense was already married to Armand Charles de Laporte, one of Europe's wealthiest men. Unfortunately, her husband was miserly, jealous, and abusive, driving Hortense into misery. Eventually, she escaped, fleeing to France and later to England. In 1675, she disguised herself as a man and tried to replace Charles's then mistress, Louise de Querouaille. By 1676, she had succeeded and was set up in apartments at St. James's Palace with an annual pension of £3,000. But her downfall came swiftly. Hortense had affairs with other men and women, including a passionate romance with one of Charles' own illegitimate daughters, Anne Leonard. Her wild behavior, heavy drinking, and endless affairs led to her decline, and she likely died from her excesses. By the time of his death in 1685, Charles II left behind no legitimate heirs, but an extraordinary legacy of mistresses, scandals, and at least a dozen acknowledged illegitimate children. His final days were telling. Of all the women he had loved, he spoke fondly only of three: Queen Catherine, Nell Gwyn, and Louise de Querouaille. And in the end, the merry monarch was remembered as much for his passion for women as for his reign over Restoration England. It's no wonder Charles II remains one of history's most colorful kings. His love life wasn't just gossip. It shaped the politics, culture, and very fabric of the court. And centuries later, people are still fascinated by the women who captured the heart of the king, who lived and loved more freely than any other monarch before or since. Where Charles's affairs painted the court in laughter and scandal, another king's obsessions would plunge England into blood, broken vows, and an upheaval that altered the nation forever. That king was Henry VIII. King Henry VIII's affairs and illegitimate children. Henry VIII is probably the most infamous king England ever had, and not without reason. When people hear his name, the first thing that comes to mind is his 6 wives and the trail of drama, heartbreak, and executions that came with them. But beyond the beheadings and the scandals, Henry was also the man who ripped England away from the Roman Catholic Church and reshaped religion in the country forever. He was larger than life in every sense, powerful, unpredictable, and desperate for the one thing he wanted most: a son to secure his dynasty. And yet, for all the wives and mistresses who passed through his bedchamber, the truth is that Henry only managed to produce 3 legitimate children who survived infancy: Edward VI, Mary I, and Elizabeth I. The rest either died tragically young or were illegitimate, and among those, only one was ever formally acknowledged: Henry Fitzroy. That scarcity of heirs haunted Henry his whole life and dictated much of his ruthless behavior, from divorces to executions to rewriting the very fabric of English law and religion. Let's start with Edward VI, Henry's first and only legitimate son, the crown jewel he fought so hard to bring into the world. Edward was born on October 12, 1537, to Henry's 3rd wife, Jane Seymour. For Henry, it was a triumph. At last, the male heir he had obsessed over for decades. He called Edward his most noble and most precious jewel, but the price was high. Jane Seymour died just days after Edward's birth, likely from postnatal complications, leaving Henry devastated yet proud of his long-awaited son. Edward ascended the throne in 1547 at just 9 years old after Henry's death. A child king in a turbulent time, his reign was short and fragile, lasting only 6 years before illness claimed him in 1553. Historians believe it was tuberculosis, though no one can say for sure. Because he was so young, Edward never really ruled on his own. Power fell into the hands of regents, first his uncle, the Duke of Somerset, and later John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland. Edward himself, however, was deeply Protestant, raised in the faith, and determined to carry on his father's mission of pulling England further away from Catholicism. When Edward's health began to fail at just 15, he panicked. He feared that if his Catholic half-sister Mary came to the throne, she would undo everything he had fought for and drag England back to Rome. So Edward tried to rewrite the line of succession, disowning both of his sisters, Mary and Elizabeth, and naming his cousin Lady Jane Grey as heir instead. But the plan crumbled with his death. Edward passed away on July 6, 1553, at only 15 years old, his reign over almost before it began. And that brings us to Mary I, better known in history as Bloody Mary. Born in 1516 to Catherine of Aragon, Henry's first wife, Mary was once her father's pride and joy. But everything changed when Catherine failed to give Henry the son he so desperately wanted. Henry divorced Catherine, broke from the Catholic Church, and demoted Mary from princess to merely lady. It was a humiliation that scarred her deeply. After Henry's death, Mary clawed her way to the throne in 1553, seizing power after the death of her younger brother Edward and the downfall of Lady Jane Grey. Determined to restore the Catholic faith, Mary waged a ruthless campaign against Protestant dissenters. In just 5 years, over 280 people were burnt at the stake for their beliefs, a bloody chapter that earned her the infamous nickname she still carries today. Mary also married Philip II of Spain, but the union produced no children. Haunted by phantom pregnancies and declining health, Mary died in 1558 at the age of 42. With no heir to follow her, the throne passed to her younger half-sister, Elizabeth. Elizabeth I, arguably the most legendary of Henry's children, was born in 1533 to Anne Boleyn, Henry's second wife. Elizabeth's life was shadowed by scandal from the very start. When Anne was executed for treason and adultery in 1536, Elizabeth was barely 2.5 years old. Declared illegitimate, she grew up navigating the dangerous tides of Tudor politics. During her sister Mary's reign, she was even imprisoned in the Tower of London, accused of plotting with Protestant rebels. Somehow, she survived. When Mary died childless, Elizabeth became queen at 25. Her reign, lasting 45 years, became one of the most iconic eras in English history, the Elizabethan age. She steered the country back toward Protestantism, but with more tolerance than her siblings. Known as the Virgin Queen, she never married, despite endless suitors. Some say it was political strategy, others say it was personal choice. But either way, she left no heir. Elizabeth's reign saw the rise of England as a global power. Francis Drake circumnavigated the globe. Privateers expanded English influence. And in 1588, her navy defeated the mighty Spanish Armada, a turning point that cemented England's dominance at sea. By the time she died in 1603 at 69 years old, Elizabeth had secured her place as one of the most celebrated monarchs in history. With no children of her own, the crown passed to James I, uniting the English and Scottish crowns. But Henry's story doesn't end with these three. Behind the throne lurked whispers of illegitimate children, many of them, in fact. The only one Henry ever admitted to was Henry Fitzroy, born in 1519 to Elizabeth Blount, one of Catherine of Aragon's ladies-in-waiting. Fitzroy was born in secret, but unlike his other suspected bastards, Henry openly acknowledged him. In a bold move, he gave the boy the surname Fitzroy, meaning son of the king, a clear statement of pride and recognition. Fitzroy wasn't just acknowledged, he was elevated. Henry showered him with titles, naming him Duke of Richmond and Somerset, Lord High Admiral of England, and Lord President of the Council of the North. It was as close as any illegitimate child could get to being treated like a legitimate heir. At times, Henry even toyed with the idea of putting Fitzroy in the line of succession. But fate intervened. Fitzroy fell gravely ill with what was likely tuberculosis and died in 1536 at just 17 years old, ending any chance of his claim to the throne. Beyond Fitzroy, there were plenty of rumors about other children: Thomas Stukely, Richard Edwards, Catherine Carey, Henry Carey, Ethelred Amalt, and John Perrot, to name a few. Historians have debated these claims for centuries, but Henry himself never acknowledged any of them. Without recognition, none of these supposed children could ever be taken seriously as heirs, and their true parentage remains lost to history. And that's what makes Henry VIII's dynasty so fascinating and tragic. For all his power, for all the wives and mistresses, for all the upheaval he caused in pursuit of a male heir, his legacy rested on just 3 legitimate children, Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth, and 1 acknowledged illegitimate son who died too young. In the end, it wasn't the sons he so desperately wanted who defined his reign, but his daughters, especially Elizabeth, who secured the Tudor legacy and left a mark on history. Do you think King Charles actually fathered any illegitimate children? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.